Long before Rome, before Alexander, and even before written history, two ancient powers met in a battle that changed the world forever. This is the untold story of Egypt versus the Canaanites, the first recorded war in human history. History is not just a story of peace and creation, it is also a story of conflict and change. Long ago, in the ancient world, empires were just beginning to grow. These powerful kingdoms wanted more land, more resources, and more control. They were like young giants, stretching their arms out across the world. This ambition often led to disagreements with their neighbors. When talking failed, these disagreements turned into war. The first wars were not just small fights. They were organized struggles between entire nations. They were epic clashes that would shape the future of civilizations for thousands of years to come. These ancient battles were the first time we see armies, strategies, and leaders coming together on a grand scale. Imagine a world where writing was a new invention. People were just starting to record their own stories, their triumphs, and their defeats. This is the world of the New Kingdom of Egypt, around 1457 BC. For the first time, scribes were present with the armies. They carved the stories of battles onto the stone walls of temples. This is why we know so much about these early conflicts. They wanted everyone, for all of time, to remember the power and glory of their pharaohs. These records are like the world's first history books, written not on paper, but in stone. They tell us not just who won, but how they fought, and why. Before these large, recorded battles, most fighting was likely smaller. Perhaps they were skirmishes between tribes over hunting grounds or access to water. But the rise of great cities and powerful rulers changed everything. Now, kings and pharaohs could command thousands of soldiers. They could equip them with weapons made of bronze and train them to fight as a single, powerful unit. War became a tool of the state, a way to build an empire, and to protect it from rivals. It was a brutal but effective way to impose your will upon the world and to secure your place in history. This new era of organized warfare marks a major turning point for humanity. It represents a shift from simple survival to complex political strategy. The leaders who mastered this new kind of conflict became legends. Their decisions on the battlefield could mean the difference between a flourishing empire and total ruin. The story of the first recorded battle is not just about soldiers and chariots. It is the story of the birth of military history itself, a moment when humanity began to consciously document its own struggles for power, a tradition that continues to this very day. On one side of this historic conflict was the mighty Egyptian Empire. Egypt was one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the world. Its people had built the great pyramids and majestic temples along the Nile River. They were led by a young and ambitious pharaoh named Thutmose III. He was a new ruler, and he needed to prove his strength to his people and to his enemies. The Egyptian army was professional and very well organized. It had infantry soldiers who carried spears and shields, and skilled archers who could rain arrows down on their foes. They were a disciplined and formidable force, loyal to their god-king. The most powerful weapon in the Egyptian arsenal was the war chariot. This was a light, two-wheeled cart pulled by two fast horses. One man would drive the chariot, while another, often the pharaoh himself, would stand beside him, firing arrows with a powerful composite bow. These chariots were like the tanks of the ancient world. They could move quickly across the battlefield, breaking enemy lines and causing chaos and fear. Thutmose III had hundreds of these chariots, gleaming with gold and bronze. They were a symbol of Egyptian power and technological superiority, ready to be unleashed upon anyone who dared to challenge the pharaoh's authority. On the other side were the Canaanites. Canaan was not a single, unified empire like Egypt. It was a region made up of many different city-states, each with its own king. These cities, like Megiddo and Kadesh, were important centers of trade. They controlled the routes that connected Egypt with the powerful empires in Mesopotamia, like the Mitanni. The king of Kadesh saw an opportunity. He knew the pharaoh of Egypt was young and untested, so he united many of the Canaanite kings into a great coalition. Their goal was to rebel against Egyptian control and seize power over the valuable trade routes for themselves. The Canaanite army was a large and diverse force, drawn from many different cities. They also had chariots and infantry, just like the Egyptians. Their strength was in their numbers and their defensive position. They gathered their forces at the strategic city of Megiddo, This city was heavily fortified with strong walls and it controlled a key mountain pass. The Canaanite kings felt confident that they could defeat the young Pharaoh's army. They believed their combined strength and their well-chosen location would be enough to stop the Egyptian advance and secure their freedom from the empire of the Nile. The stage for this epic confrontation was the city of Megiddo. This ancient city was incredibly important because of its location. It stood at the entrance to a major pass through the Carmel Ridge Mountains. This pass, known as the Aruna Pass, was the most direct route for armies and traders traveling from Egypt to the north. Whoever controlled Megiddo controlled this vital economic and military highway. The Canaanite coalition chose this spot deliberately. They blockaded the main roads, believing the Egyptian army would have to take the long way around, giving the Canaanites time to prepare for a defensive battle on ground they knew well. Pharaoh Thutmose III and his army arrived at the foot of the mountains. His generals advised him to take one of the safer, wider roads that went around the mountain range. They warned him that the direct route through the Aruna Pass was extremely narrow. It was so narrow, they said, that the army would have to march in a single file, horse after horse and man after man. This was a huge risk. If the Canaanites were waiting in ambush inside the pass, they could easily trap and destroy the entire Egyptian army piece by piece. The generals begged their pharaoh not to gamble with the fate of Egypt, but Thutmose III was a bold and clever leader. He saw a great opportunity in this great risk. He reasoned that his enemies would think exactly like his generals. They would expect him to take the safe route. Therefore, the narrow pass, the most dangerous path, was probably the one they were guarding the least. In a brilliant move of psychological warfare, he decided to do the unexpected. He announced to his army that he, their pharaoh, would personally lead them through the dangerous Aruna Pass. This act of courage inspired his soldiers, who pledged to follow their king wherever he went. The Egyptian army began its slow, tense march through the narrow canyon. Just as Thutmose III had predicted, the pass was unguarded. The Canaanite forces were waiting at the exits of the two wider, safer roads, completely unaware that the Egyptians were taking the central route. When the Egyptian army emerged from the pass onto the plains before Megiddo, they had achieved complete tactical surprise. The Canaanite kings were shocked to see the entire Egyptian army forming up for battle right in front of them. The pharaoh's great gamble had paid off perfectly, giving him a massive advantage before the fighting even began. With the element of surprise on their side, the Egyptians quickly formed their battle lines. The morning sun glinted off their bronze shields and weapons. Thutmose III, standing tall in his shining electrum chariot, gave the order to advance. The Egyptian army moved forward in a crescent formation, designed to envelop the enemy. The southern wing swept around to cut off the Canaanites' escape route, while the northern wing pushed towards the city itself. The sudden and organized attack threw the unprepared Canaanite forces into total confusion. Their coalition, once so confident, began to crumble in the face of the disciplined Egyptian charge. The battle itself was swift and decisive. The Egyptian chariot smashed into the Canaanite lines, breaking their formation and spreading panic. The Canaanite soldiers and their kings, seeing the battle was lost, abandoned their own valuable chariots and fled in terror towards the safety of Megiddo's city walls. However, in their haste, the people inside the city closed the gates to prevent the Egyptians from getting in. The fleeing kings and soldiers had to be hauled up the walls with ropes made of tied-together clothing. This moment of chaos was a critical mistake for the Egyptians, who stopped to plunder the abandoned Canaanite camp instead of capturing the fleeing kings. Although the Egyptian soldiers' greed for loot allowed the enemy leaders to escape into the city, the victory on the field was absolute. Thutmose III then laid siege to Megiddo. After 7 long months, the trapped and starving Canaanite kings finally surrendered. They came out and bowed before the pharaoh, begging for their lives. Thutmose III proved to be a strategic ruler. Instead of executing them, he made them swear oaths of loyalty to Egypt, ensuring that the region would remain under his control. The plunder from the battle was immense, with hundreds of chariots, thousands of animals, and vast amounts of treasure taken back to Egypt. The Battle of Megiddo is remembered today as the first battle in history to be recorded in detail. The pharaoh's personal scribe wrote down every aspect of the campaign, from the march to the final victory, on the walls of the Temple of Karnak. This battle established Thutmose III as a great military genius, earning him the nickname, the Napoleon of Egypt. It secured Egyptian dominance over the Near East for centuries and demonstrated the power of strategy, surprise, and bold leadership. Its story, carved in stone, has survived for over 3,000 years, a timeless lesson in the art of war.